The notification sound from my phone pierced through the quiet evening air as I sat cross-legged on my bed, laptop balanced precariously on my knees. I glanced at the screen and saw Jake's name illuminated against the dark background. My heart did that stupid little skip it always did when he texted me. Even though I'd been living with him for 8 months now and should have been used to our casual communication by then. Hey man, you home? Had the worst day ever. Could really use some company. I stared at the message for a moment longer than necessary, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I tried to formulate a response that didn't sound too eager. Jake Morrison had been my roommate since the beginning of our sophomore year at college, and in all that time, I'd managed to keep my growing feelings for him carefully hidden behind a facade of easy friendship and casual banter. Yeah, I'm here. Door's unlocked. Come on up whenever you want. I hit send and immediately regretted how available I sounded. But Jake had this way of making me forget all my carefully constructed walls, especially when he needed support. He was the kind of guy who rarely asked for help, so when he did reach out, I found it impossible to say no. The sound of his key in the front door echoed through our small apartment about 10 minutes later, followed by the familiar thud of his backpack hitting the floor and his heavy footsteps on the stairs. I could tell from the way he was moving that whatever had happened today had really gotten to him. Jake usually bounded up those stairs 2 at a time, but tonight his steps were slow and deliberate. In here, I called out when I heard him pause outside my bedroom door. He appeared in the doorway looking absolutely defeated, his usually perfectly styled dark hair disheveled, and his blue eyes lacking their typical spark. His white button-down shirt was wrinkled and partially untucked from his jeans, and there was a tension in his shoulders that made me want to reach out and smooth it away. Rough day? I asked, closing my laptop and setting it aside to give him my full attention. Jake let out a long sigh and ran his hand through his hair, making it stick up at odd angles. You could say that. Mind if I sit down? I feel like I'm about to collapse. Of course. I scooted over on my bed, making room for him beside me. The mattress dipped under his weight as he sat down heavily, and I caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with something that might have been stress sweat. What happened? For a moment, he just sat there in silence, staring down at his hands. I'd learned over the months of living together that Jake sometimes needed time to process before he could talk about whatever was bothering him. He was the type of person who internalized everything, trying to handle problems on his own until they became too overwhelming to manage alone. Everything went wrong today, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I bombed my organic chemistry exam this morning. Like, completely bombed it. I studied for weeks, Alex, and I still couldn't answer half the questions. Dr. Peterson looked at me like I was an idiot when I turned in my paper early. I felt my chest tighten with sympathy. Jake was pre-med, and organic chemistry was one of those make-or-break classes that could determine whether he'd be able to pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. He'd been stressed about it for weeks, staying up late to study and barely eating during exam periods. That sucks, man. But one exam doesn't define your entire academic career. You know that, right? He shook his head, finally looking up at me with those impossibly blue eyes that had been haunting my dreams for months. It's not just the exam. My dad called right after I left the testing center. Apparently, my mom told him about my grades last semester, and he's threatening to cut off my tuition funding if I don't bring my GPA up this term. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I knew Jake's relationship with his father was complicated at best. Mr. Morrison was a successful businessman who had very specific expectations for his son, and those expectations didn't leave much room for failure or deviation from the predetermined path. Jesus, Jake. That's a lot of pressure. And then, he continued, as if he hadn't heard me. I got to work this afternoon and found out that someone complained about my customer service last week. My manager pulled me aside and basically told me I need to shape up or they'll find someone else to cover my shifts. I can't afford to lose that job, Alex. Without it, I can't even pay my half of the rent. I watched as he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. Jake was always so composed, so put together, that seeing him like this felt almost surreal. He was the guy everyone looked up to, the one who seemed to have everything figured out. But sitting there on my bed, he looked young and vulnerable and completely overwhelmed. Hey, I said softly, reaching out to touch his shoulder. The contact sent a familiar jolt through me, but I pushed those feelings aside. This wasn't about my ridiculous crush. This was about my friend who was clearly struggling. It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out. He looked up at me then, and I was struck by how close we were sitting. I could see the flecks of green in his blue eyes, could count the individual eyelashes that framed them. For a moment, neither of us moved, and I felt that familiar tension that had been building between us for months. "You always know what to say," he said quietly. "I don't know how you do it, but you always manage to make me feel better when everything else is falling apart." My heart hammered against my ribs as I processed his words. There was something in his voice, something in the way he was looking at me, that felt different from our usual interactions. More intimate somehow, more charged with unspoken meaning. "I just care about you," I managed to say, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "You're important to me, Jake. More important than you probably realize." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the admission. But instead of pulling away or making things awkward, Jake moved closer to me on the bed, close enough that our knees were touching. "You're important to me too," he said, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear him. More than I probably should admit. We sat there in silence for a long moment, the weight of our mutual confessions hanging between us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the familiar scent of his shampoo, mixed with something uniquely him. My hands were trembling slightly, and I clasped them together in my lap to hide my nervousness. "Alex," Jake said suddenly, his voice breaking the spell that had settled over us. "Can I ask you something? And will you promise to be honest with me?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I tried to speak. "Do you ever feel like there's something between us? Something more than just friendship?" The question hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and hoping for since the day Jake had moved in. The moment when our carefully maintained friendship would either evolve into something more or explode spectacularly in our faces. "Yes," I whispered, the word barely audible even in the quiet of my bedroom. "I do." Jake's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't actually expected me to admit it. "I thought I was going crazy," he said, letting out a shaky laugh. "I've been feeling this pull toward you for months now, and I kept telling myself it was just because we live together and spend so much time in each other's space. But it's more than that, isn't it?" I nodded again, still not trusting myself to speak. My heart was racing so fast I was surprised he couldn't hear it. "I've never felt this way about a guy before," Jake continued, his words tumbling out in a rush as if he was afraid he'd lose his nerve if he stopped talking. "I mean, I've always been attracted to women. I've had girlfriends, I've been in love before. But with you, it's different. It's like you see parts of me that I don't even show to myself." "Jake," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Let me finish, please. I need to get this out before I lose my courage." He took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "Today, when everything was falling apart, and I felt like I was drowning in all this pressure and expectation, the only person I wanted to talk to was you. Not my family, not my other friends, not any of the girls I've dated. You. And I realize that's been true for a while now. Whenever something good happens, you're the first person I want to share it with. When something goes wrong, you're the only one who can make me feel better." The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This was everything I'd wanted to hear from him, but I'd never dared to hope it might actually happen. "I feel the same way," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how long I've been wanting to tell you that." Jake reached out then, his hand covering mine where it rested on the bed between us. His skin was warm and slightly rough from his job at the campus recreation center, and the contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. "What does this mean for us?" he asked, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand. "I don't want to mess up what we have, but I also can't keep pretending that I don't feel this connection between us." "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never been in this situation before either. I mean, I've known I was gay since high school, but I've never had feelings for someone who wasn't sure about their own sexuality." "I'm not sure about a lot of things right now," Jake said, his eyes meeting mine. "But I'm sure about how I feel when I'm with you. You make me feel calm and centered in a way that no one else ever has. Even today, when everything was completely falling apart, just being here with you is making me feel like maybe things will be okay." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache with tenderness. I turned my hand over so our palms were touching, our fingers naturally intertwining. The gesture felt both foreign and completely natural at the same time. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on our joined hands. When he looked up at me again, there was a determination in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Can we just take this slow? Figure it out as we go?" He paused, seeming to gather his courage for whatever he was about to say next. "And maybe, for tonight, could you just hold me? I know that probably sounds ridiculous, but I feel like I haven't been able to relax in weeks, and being close to you is the only thing that makes sense right now." The request sent a warm flush through my entire body. The idea of holding Jake, of having him in my arms, was something I'd fantasized about more times than I cared to admit. But hearing him ask for it, hearing the genuine need in his voice, made it feel less like a fantasy and more like something real and important. "That doesn't sound ridiculous at all," I said, my voice soft. "I'd like that too." We spent a few minutes rearranging ourselves on the bed, both of us moving with the careful awkwardness of people navigating new territory. Jake kicked off his shoes and socks, then hesitated for a moment before unbuttoning his wrinkled shirt and tossing it toward my laundry basket. Underneath, he wore a fitted white t-shirt that clung to his chest and shoulders in ways that made my mouth go dry. I tried not to stare as he settled back against my pillows, but it was impossible not to notice the way the soft cotton stretched across his torso, or how his jeans sat low on his hips. Jake had always been attractive, but seeing him in my bed, looking relaxed and vulnerable, was almost overwhelming. "Come here," he said, opening his arms and looking at me with an expression that was equal parts nervous and hopeful. I moved closer, my heart hammering as I settled against his side. His arm came around me immediately, pulling me closer until my head was resting on his chest. I could hear his heartbeat beneath my ear, steady and strong, and I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying for months finally begin to ease. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. "More than okay," I murmured, allowing myself to relax fully against him. His free hand came up to stroke through my hair, and I had to bite back a sound of contentment at the gentle touch. We lay there in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds in the room our synchronized breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. Jake's hand continued its slow movement through my hair, occasionally trailing down to trace patterns on my shoulder or arm. Each touch sent shivers through me, but there was nothing urgent or demanding about the contact. It felt safe and comforting and right in a way that I'd never experienced before. "Alex." Jake's voice was drowsy, and I could feel the vibration of it against my cheek. Thank you. For this, for listening, for just being you. I don't think I've ever felt this peaceful before." I lifted my head to look at him, taking in the relaxed expression on his face and the way his eyes had gone soft and unfocused. "You don't have to thank me for anything. This is exactly where I want to be." He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and made my stomach flip. "I was so scared to tell you how I felt. I kept thinking you'd laugh at me or tell me I was confused or that it would ruin our friendship." "Never," I said firmly. "Even if this hadn't turned out the way it did, I would never laugh at you for being honest about your feelings. And nothing could ruin our friendship, Jake. You mean too much to me. I love how you always know exactly what to say," he said, his hand cupping my cheek. "It's like you can see right through all my defenses and know exactly what I need to hear." The word love hung in the air between us, and I wondered if he'd chosen it deliberately or if it had just slipped out. Either way, it made my heart race and my palms sweat with nervous anticipation. "I just pay attention," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're not as hard to read as you think you are." "Maybe not to you," he said, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "But you're the only one who's ever bothered to really look." The intimacy of the moment was almost overwhelming. Here was Jake, the guy I'd been pining over for months, telling me that I was special to him, that I saw him in ways others didn't. It felt too good to be true, like I might wake up any moment and find it had all been an elaborate dream. "Can I ask you something?" I said, needing to ground myself in reality. "Anything. Are you sure about this? About us? I don't want you to wake up tomorrow and regret any of this because you were feeling vulnerable tonight." Jake's expression grew serious, and he shifted slightly, so we were facing each other more directly. "I've been thinking about this for months, Alex. Tonight didn't create these feelings. It just gave me the courage to finally admit them. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and pretend this didn't happen or that I don't feel the way I do. But what about your family? Your friends? I know your dad has pretty traditional views about relationships and marriage. A shadow passed over Jake's face at the mention of his father. My dad has opinions about a lot of things, and most of them are wrong. I spent too many years trying to live up to his expectations, trying to be the perfect son he wanted. But I'm tired of living my life for other people. I want to figure out what makes me happy, and right now, that seems to involve you. The conviction in his voice was reassuring, but I could still see the uncertainty lurking beneath the surface. This was all new territory for both of us, and there were bound to be challenges ahead that we couldn't even anticipate yet. What about your sexuality? I asked gently. I don't want to pressure you to label yourself or figure everything out right now, but I also want to make sure we're on the same page about what this means. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. I honestly don't know what label fits me right now. I've always been attracted to women, and I still am. But what I feel for you is different from anything I've experienced before. It's not just physical attraction, though that's definitely part of it. It's emotional and intellectual and spiritual, if that makes sense. You challenge me and comfort me and make me want to be a better person all at the same time. It makes perfect sense, I said, my heart swelling with affection for this brave, confused, wonderful man lying beside me. And you don't have to have it all figured out right now. We can take this one day at a time and see where it leads us. I'd like that, he said, his arm tightening around me. I'd like that a lot. We settled back into our previous position, with my head on his chest and his arms wrapped around me. The conversation had left me feeling both exhilarated and emotionally drained, and I could tell Jake was feeling the same way. His breathing had grown deeper and more regular, and his hand had stilled in my hair. Jake, I said softly, not sure if he was still awake. Are you falling asleep? Maybe a little, he admitted, his voice thick with drowsiness. Is that okay? I know this is your bed, and I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, I said quickly. Stay as long as you want. Stay all night if you need to. I might take you up on that, he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the top of my head. The gesture was so tender and natural that it made my eyes sting with unshed tears. Good, I whispered, settling more comfortably against him. I'd like that too. As Jake's breathing evened out and his grip on me relaxed slightly, I allowed myself to really process what had just happened. In the span of a few hours, my entire relationship with my roommate had shifted from friendship to something deeper and more complex. It was terrifying and exhilarating and perfect all at once. I thought about all the nights I'd lain in this same bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what it would be like to have Jake's arms around me. I'd imagined scenarios where he might realize his feelings for me, but none of my fantasies had been as gentle or as emotionally intense as the reality. This wasn't just about physical attraction or sexual curiosity. This was about two people who cared deeply for each other finally acknowledging that their connection went beyond friendship. The weight of Jake's arm around me, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear, the warmth of his body against mine. It all felt like coming home after a long journey. I'd never experienced this kind of contentment before, this sense of being exactly where I belonged. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Would Jake wake up and want to talk more about what this meant for us? Would he be nervous or regretful in the harsh light of day? Would we be able to navigate this new dynamic without losing the friendship that had become so important to both of us? But those worries felt distant and manageable when weighed against the solid reality of Jake's presence beside me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. And for tonight, that was enough. I woke up several hours later to the sound of Jake shifting beside me. The room was dark except for the faint glow of streetlights filtering through my curtains, and it took me a moment to remember where I was and why there was another person in my bed. Sorry, Jake whispered when he realized I was awake. I was trying not to wake you. It's okay, I said, my voice rough with sleep. What time is it? A little after 3, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I've been awake for a while, just thinking. Good thoughts or bad thoughts? Mostly good, he said, his hand finding mine in the darkness. I keep waiting for the panic to set in, for my brain to start telling me that this is crazy or wrong, or that I'm making a huge mistake. But it's not happening. I just feel right. Like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Relief flooded through me at his words. I'd been harboring similar fears about his potential regret, so hearing him express contentment rather than anxiety was incredibly reassuring. I'm glad, I said, squeezing his hand. I was worried you might wake up and want to pretend this never happened. Not a chance, he said firmly. If anything, being here with you like this has made me more certain about my feelings, not less. I've never felt this comfortable with another person before, Alex. It's like I can finally breathe properly for the first time in months. We lay there in comfortable silence for a while, our hands still linked between us. I could feel Jake's thumb tracing small patterns on my palm, an unconscious gesture that sent warmth spreading through my chest. Can I tell you something? Jake said eventually, his voice soft in the darkness. Of course. I've been having dreams about you. For weeks now. Not necessarily sexual dreams, though there have been some of those too, he added with a self-conscious laugh. But mostly just dreams about being close to you like this. Holding you, talking to you, feeling this kind of peace and connection. I kept waking up feeling confused and frustrated because I couldn't figure out what it meant. And now I think my subconscious was trying to tell me something my conscious mind wasn't ready to hear yet. That what I feel for you goes way beyond friendship, and that I've been denying it because it didn't fit with my understanding of myself. I turned on my side to face him, even though I could barely make out his features in the dim light. What changed? What made you ready to hear it? Jake was quiet for a moment, and I could sense him gathering his thoughts. I think it was seeing how much I needed you today. When everything was falling apart, you were the only person who could make me feel better. And not just because you said the right things or gave good advice, but because being near you physically calmed me down in a way that nothing else could. That's not normal friendship behavior, is it? Probably not, I agreed with a soft laugh. Though I have to admit, I've been using you as my own personal stress relief for months without really realizing it. Whenever I had a bad day or felt overwhelmed, I'd find excuses to hang out with you because you always made me feel better. Really, there was a note of wonder in Jake's voice, as if the idea that he could have that effect on someone was surprising to him. Really, you have this way of making me feel like everything's going to be okay, even when my world feels like it's falling apart. I used to think it was just because you're naturally calming and optimistic, but now I'm wondering if it was something deeper than that. Maybe we've been taking care of each other all along without realizing it, Jake said thoughtfully. Maybe this connection has been building for months, and we were just too scared or confused to acknowledge it. The idea made perfect sense to me. Looking back on our friendship, there had been countless moments of intimacy and connection that had felt like more than just roommate bonding. The way Jake would seek me out when he was stressed, the way I felt most like myself when he was around, the comfortable silences and easy conversations that could last for hours. I think you're right, I said. I think we've been falling for each other gradually, and tonight just forced us to finally admit it. Falling for each other, Jake repeated, testing the words. I like how that sounds. It feels accurate, like it's been happening slowly and naturally rather than all at once. Is that scary for you? The idea of falling for another guy? Jake considered the question seriously. It should be, shouldn't it? I mean, it's completely outside my experience and everything I thought I knew about myself. But honestly, the gender thing feels less important than the person thing. I'm falling for you, Alex. The fact that you're a man is just one aspect of who you are, not the defining characteristic. His words made my heart swell with affection and gratitude. I'd been worried that his attraction to me might be more about experimentation or curiosity than genuine feeling, but the way he talked about it made it clear that his emotions ran much deeper than that. That means a lot to me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I've been attracted to you for so long, but I was always afraid that even if you were interested, it would be more about the novelty than about actually wanting to be with me specifically. Trust me, there's nothing novel about the way I feel about you. It's deep and real, and honestly a little overwhelming. I've never wanted to be this close to another person before, never felt this need to know everything about someone and share everything about myself in return. As if to emphasize his point, Jake shifted closer to me on the bed, close enough that I could feel his breath against my face. The intimacy of the moment was almost overwhelming, and I found myself holding my breath as he reached up to cup my cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question sent a jolt of electricity through my entire body. I'd been imagining what it might be like to kiss Jake for months, but I'd never actually believed it might happen. Now, with his hand warm against my face and his body so close to mine, the possibility felt both surreal and inevitable. Yes, I breathed, the word barely audible even in the quiet of the room. Jake leaned forward slowly, giving me plenty of time to change my mind or pull away. But I found myself meeting him halfway, my eyes fluttering closed as our lips finally touched. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, both of us clearly nervous about this new territory we were exploring. But as the seconds passed, and neither of us pulled away, it deepened naturally. Jake's lips were warm and soft, and he tasted faintly of the mint gum he'd been chewing earlier. The hand on my cheek slid back to tangle in my hair, and I found myself pressing closer to him, my own hands coming up to rest against his chest. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Jake rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. "Wow," he said softly. "That was—" "Yeah," I agreed, not trusting myself to form complete sentences. The kiss had been everything I'd imagined and more, tender and passionate and perfect in ways that made my head spin. "I want to do that again," Jake said, opening his eyes to look at me. "Is that okay?" Instead of answering with words, I leaned forward and captured his lips with mine again. This time, the kiss was less hesitant and more confident. Jake's arms came around me, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel the solid warmth of his body against mine, could taste the growing desire in his kiss. We kissed for what felt like hours, sometimes soft and sweet, sometimes deeper and more urgent. Jake's hands roamed over my back and shoulders, and I found myself mapping the contours of his chest and arms through his thin t-shirt. Every touch sent sparks through my nervous system, and I had to remind myself to breathe. "Alex," Jake murmured against my lips during a brief pause. "This feels so right. I can't believe I waited so long to tell you how I felt." "We both waited," I pointed out, pressing soft kisses along his jawline. "But we're here now. That's what matters." Jake made a soft sound of agreement, his hands sliding down to rest on my hips. The contact made me shiver, and I felt him smile against my neck where he'd begun pressing gentle kisses. "I love the way you respond to me," he said, his voice low and rough with desire. "I love that I can make you feel good." His words sent heat flooding through my body, and I had to bite back a groan. The combination of his voice, his touch, and his obvious pleasure in affecting me was almost overwhelming. "You do make me feel good," I managed to say, my voice breathless. "You make me feel things I've never felt before." "Same here," Jake said, pulling back to look at me. Even in the dim light, I could see the desire burning in his eyes. I had no idea it could feel like this. Being with someone, I mean. This connected and intense and right. We continued kissing and touching, exploring this new dynamic between us with careful hands and whispered words. Jake seemed fascinated by every reaction he could draw from me, and I found myself equally entranced by the soft sounds he made when I touched him in certain ways. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake desire, and our movements became slower and more languid. Jake pulled me against his chest again, and I settled into the familiar position with a contented sigh. "I should probably go back to my own room," Jake said, though his arms tightened around me as if he didn't actually want to move. "You don't have to," I said quickly. "I mean, if you want to stay, you're welcome to. No pressure either way." "I want to stay," he admitted. "I want to wake up next to you and see if this all feels as real in the morning as it does right now." "Then stay," I said simply. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." Jake pressed another soft kiss to the top of my head, and I felt him relax completely against me. "Thank you," he murmured. "For everything. For listening, for being patient with me, for letting me figure this out at my own pace." "Thank you for trusting me enough to share all of this with me," I replied. "For being brave enough to tell me how you felt." As we settled into sleep, I found myself marveling at how much had changed in just one evening. This morning, Jake had been my straight roommate who I harbored secret feelings for. Now, he was something else entirely, someone who cared for me the way I cared for him, someone who wanted to explore this connection between us, someone who felt as right in my arms as I felt in his. The future was still uncertain, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead as we navigated this new relationship. But lying there in the darkness with Jake's arms around me and his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I felt more hopeful and content than I had in months. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through my curtains and the unfamiliar but wonderful sensation of another person's body pressed against mine. For a moment, I lay still with my eyes closed, afraid that moving might break the spell and reveal that everything from the night before had been an elaborate dream. But the solid warmth of Jake's chest beneath my cheek and the weight of his arm around my waist were undeniably real. I could hear his steady breathing and feel the gentle rise and fall of his chest with each breath. He was still asleep, his body completely relaxed in a way that suggested he'd slept well. Carefully, I lifted my head to look at him. In the morning light, Jake looked younger somehow, his face soft and peaceful in sleep. His dark hair was mussed from the pillow, and there was a faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. He was beautiful in that unconscious way that people sometimes are when they're completely unguarded. As if sensing my gaze, Jake's eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on my face. For a moment, we just looked at each other, both of us probably checking to see if the other was feeling any regret or awkwardness about the night before. "Good morning," Jake said softly, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, searching his expression for any signs of uncertainty or discomfort. Instead, I saw warmth and contentment and something that might have been wonder. "How did you sleep?" he asked, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair away from my face. "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "You?" "Same. I think that was the most peaceful night I've had since the semester started." Jake's smile was soft and genuine, and I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying ease out of my shoulders. "No regrets." "None," I said firmly. "You?" "Not a single one," he said, leaning up to press a gentle kiss to my lips. "If anything, I'm wondering why we waited so long to do this." The kiss was soft and sweet, tasting faintly of sleep and contentment. When we broke apart, Jake settled back against the pillows, keeping me close against his side. "So what happens now?" I asked, voicing the question that had been hovering at the edge of my consciousness since I'd woken up. "I don't know," Jake said honestly. "I've never been in this situation before. But I know I don't want to go back to pretending that what's between us is just friendship. I want to see where this leads, if you're willing." "I'm definitely willing," I said, relief flooding through me. "I just want to make sure we're both clear about what we're getting into. This is new territory for both of us in different ways." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I think we should probably talk about expectations and boundaries and all that practical stuff. But maybe not right now. Right now, I just want to enjoy this feeling of being close to you without overthinking it." "I can get behind that plan," I said, settling more comfortably against him. "Though we should probably get up soon. Don't you have that chemistry study group this morning?" Jake groaned, the peaceful expression on his face shifting to one of mild distress. "I completely forgot about that. And after yesterday's disaster of an exam, I really can't afford to miss it. What time is it supposed to start?" Jake reached for his phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen. 11:30. "It's 10:15 now, so I have a little time." He set the phone aside and looked down at me. "But that means I should probably get up and shower and try to make myself look like I didn't spend the night having an emotional crisis." "You don't look like you had an emotional crisis," I said, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "You look relaxed and happy. It's a good look on you." Jake caught my hand and pressed a kiss to my palm, a gesture so tender it made my heart skip. "That's because of you. Yesterday, I felt like I was drowning, and now I feel like I can handle anything." "The study group will go fine," I said with more confidence than I felt. "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for, and one bad exam doesn't erase everything you know." "See? This is what I mean," Jake said, his eyes crinkling with affection. "You always know exactly what I need to hear." "How do you do that?" "I pay attention," I said, echoing my words from the night before. "And I care about you. It's not that complicated." Jake leaned down to kiss me again, this time with more heat and urgency than before. I could feel the desire building between us, the same electric tension that had characterized our interactions the night before. But after a few moments, he pulled back with obvious reluctance. "I really do need to get ready," he said, his voice rough with want. "But I don't want to leave this bed." "The bed will still be here later," I pointed out, though I was equally reluctant to break the intimate bubble we'd created. "Promise?" Jake asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that went beyond the surface meaning. Promise, I said firmly. This isn't going anywhere, Jake. We don't have to cram everything into one morning because we're afraid it might disappear. Relief flickered across his features, and he nodded. You're right. This is all so new, and part of me is terrified that I'm going to mess it up somehow. You're not going to mess it up, I said, sitting up so I could look at him more directly. We're both going to make mistakes as we figure this out, and that's okay. The important thing is that we're honest with each other about what we're feeling and what we need. Jake sat up as well, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I can do honest. I'm not sure I have much choice anymore anyway. Being around you seems to short-circuit all my usual defenses. Is that a bad thing? No, Jake said without hesitation. It's terrifying, but it's not bad. It feels like the most honest I've ever been with another person. We spent a few more minutes talking quietly, neither of us quite ready to leave the sanctuary of my bedroom and return to the outside world. But eventually, the practical demands of the day became impossible to ignore, and Jake reluctantly climbed out of bed. Can I borrow a clean shirt? He asked, looking down at his wrinkled button-down from the day before. I don't really want to do the walk of shame back to my room in yesterday's clothes. Of course, I said, getting up to rummage through my dresser. What size are you? Medium, usually. Sometimes large depending on the cut. I pulled out a navy blue t-shirt that I thought would fit him reasonably well and tossed it in his direction. Jake caught it easily and pulled off his own shirt without any apparent self-consciousness. I tried not to stare at his bare chest and shoulders, but it was impossible not to appreciate the lean muscle and smooth skin that had been hidden beneath his clothes. See something you like? Jake asked with a teasing grin, apparently having noticed my attention. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't look away. Maybe, I said, trying to match his playful tone. Is that okay? More than okay, Jake said, his expression growing more serious. I like that you want to look at me. I like knowing that you find me attractive. The honesty in his voice sent warmth spreading through my chest. There was something incredibly intimate about this moment. Jake standing half-dressed in my bedroom, wearing my clothes, talking openly about desire and attraction. It felt domestic and romantic and charged with possibility all at once. Jake pulled on my shirt, and I was pleased to see that it fit him well, clinging to his torso in a way that emphasized his build without being too tight. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing him in my clothes, as if it were a visible symbol of the connection between us. How do I look? He asked, doing a mock fashion pose that made me laugh. Like you belong here, I said honestly, and immediately felt my cheeks warm at the admission. Jake's expression softened, and he stepped closer to me. I feel like I belong here, he said quietly. With you, I mean. It's the strangest thing, but being in your space, wearing your clothes, sleeping in your bed, it all feels natural in a way that nothing else in my life does right now. Good, I said, reaching out to smooth down the hem of his borrowed shirt. Because I like having you here. I like the way you fit into my life. We were interrupted by the sound of Jake's phone buzzing with what sounded like multiple text messages. He grimaced and reached for it, his expression growing more tense as he read whatever was on the screen. Everything okay? I asked, concerned by the sudden change in his demeanor. It's my study group, Jake said, his brow furrowed with worry. They're asking if I'm still planning to come, and apparently there's some confusion about which problems we're supposed to be working on. I really need to get there and help sort this out. Then go, I said simply. We'll still be here when you get back. Jake looked up from his phone, his expression grateful. Are you sure? I feel like I'm abandoning you after everything that happened last night. You're not abandoning me, I said firmly. You're being responsible and taking care of your commitments. That's actually really attractive, in case you were wondering. A smile tugged at the corners of Jake's mouth. Really, I've always been drawn to people who follow through on their obligations, even when they'd rather be doing something else. In that case, I should probably tell you that I also have a shift at the rec center this afternoon, Jake said, looking slightly apologetic. I know we probably have more things to talk about, but I can't afford to miss work right now. We have time, I reminded him. We live together, remember? We don't have to solve everything in one day. Jake's relief was palpable, right? Sometimes I forget that this doesn't have to be complicated just because it's new. He gathered his things and headed toward the door, then paused and turned back to me. Alex, thank you for last night, for this morning, for being so understanding about everything. I know this situation isn't exactly straightforward. Nothing worthwhile ever is, I said. Now go ace that study group and show everyone that yesterday's exam was just a fluke. Jake grinned and gave me a quick kiss before heading out the door. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs and the sound of the front door closing, then flopped back onto my bed with a contented sigh. The sheets still smelled like Jake's cologne and the faint scent of his skin, and I found myself burying my face in his pillow for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been resigned to keeping my feelings for my roommate secret indefinitely. Now, I was lying in bed that we'd shared, wearing the memory of his kisses like a warm glow around my heart. It felt too good to be true, and part of me was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Jake had been so sincere in his affection, so clear about wanting to explore this connection between us, that it was hard to maintain my usual pessimism. Maybe, for once in my life, something was actually going to work out the way I hoped it would. I spent the rest of the morning in a productive haze, catching up on reading for my literature classes and working on a paper that was due the following week. But my concentration kept drifting to thoughts of Jake, the way he'd looked sleeping in my bed, the sound of his voice when he'd asked to kiss me, the feeling of his arms around me throughout the night. Around noon, I got a text from him. Study group going better than expected. Thanks for the pep talk. See you tonight. I typed back quickly, definitely. Good luck with the rest of it. His response came almost immediately. Can't wait to come home to you. The casual use of the word home in reference to me made my heart skip, and I found myself grinning at my phone like an idiot. Jake had a way of saying exactly the right thing to make me feel valued and wanted, often without even seeming to realize he was doing it. The afternoon passed slowly, and I found myself checking the clock more frequently as evening approached. Jake had said his shift at the rec center ended at 6, which meant he'd probably be home around 6:30. I tried to focus on my schoolwork, but my mind kept wandering to what the evening might hold. Would we pick up where we'd left off that morning? Would Jake want to talk more about what this new dynamic meant for our relationship? Would we take things further physically, or continue the slow, careful exploration we'd begun the night before? I was still debating these questions when I heard Jake's key in the front door. My heart immediately began racing, and I had to resist the urge to run downstairs and greet him. Instead, I stayed in my room, listening to the familiar sounds of him dropping his gym bag and kicking off his shoes. Alex, he called up the stairs. You home? Up here. I called back, trying to keep my voice casual despite the excitement coursing through me. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, and then he appeared in my doorway looking tired but happy. He'd changed back into his own clothes at some point during the day, but he was still wearing my navy t-shirt underneath his open hoodie. Hey, he said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile that made my stomach flip. Hey yourself, I replied, closing my laptop and setting it aside. How was your day? Better than I expected, Jake said, pushing off from the doorframe and walking into my room. The study group actually helped clarify some of the concepts I was struggling with, and work was pretty quiet. But mostly I kept thinking about this morning and wondering if you were having second thoughts. No second thoughts, I said firmly. Were you? None, Jake said, sitting down on the edge of my bed. If anything, being away from you today made me more certain about how I feel. I kept finding myself wanting to text you about random things, or wishing you were there when something funny happened at work. You can text me about random things, I said, scooting closer to him on the bed. I like hearing from you. Good to know, Jake said with a grin. Because I have about a dozen things I wanted to tell you today, but didn't want to seem clingy. Tell me now, I said, settling cross-legged in front of him. I want to hear all of it. So Jake told me about his study group, how he'd actually understood more of the material than he'd thought, and how his confidence had grown throughout the session. He told me about the regular customers at the rec center who always made him laugh, and about the new workout playlist he'd discovered that had made his shift go by faster. As he talked, I found myself studying his face, noting the way his eyes lit up when he was excited about something and the gestures he made with his hands when he was trying to explain a complex concept. These were things I'd observed before during our months of friendship, but now I felt free to appreciate them openly, to let my affection show in my expression. What? Jake asked, pausing mid-sentence when he noticed my attention. Nothing, I said, feeling my cheeks warm. I just like watching you talk. You get this animated expression when you're excited about something. Jake's smile grew wider. You're going to make me self-conscious if you keep looking at me like that. Like what? Like you're completely fascinated by everything I'm saying. Like I'm the most interesting person in the world. To me, you are, I said honestly. I've always thought so, even before last night. The sincerity in my voice seemed to catch Jake off guard, and his expression grew more serious. Alex, he said softly, reaching out to take my hand. I need you to know something. What happened between us last night? What's happening now? It's not just because I was feeling vulnerable or because you were there when I needed someone. These feelings I have for you, they're real and they're strong and they're not going away. I know, I said, squeezing his hand. I can see it in the way you look at me, hear it in your voice when you talk to me. This isn't just gratitude or confusion or experimentation. This is real. It is real, Jake confirmed, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. And I want to explore it properly, without rushing or putting pressure on either of us to figure everything out immediately. What does that look like to you? I asked, genuinely curious about his vision for how we might navigate this new territory. Jake was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through his answer. I think it means being honest about what we're feeling and what we want, even when it's scary or uncertain. It means taking things at a pace that feels comfortable for both of us. And it means not trying to label or define everything right away, just letting this develop naturally. That sounds perfect to me, I said. I don't need you to have all the answers right now, Jake. I just need you to be present and honest and willing to figure it out with me. I can definitely do that, Jake said, lifting our joined hands to press a kiss to my knuckles. The gesture was so tender it made my heart ache with affection. Good, I said, leaning forward to rest my forehead against his. Because I'm falling for you pretty hard, and I'd like to know that you're planning to stick around long enough for me to land. Jake's breath caught at my words, and when I pulled back to look at him, his eyes were bright with emotion. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. I promise you that. Whatever this becomes, wherever it leads us, I'm committed to seeing it through. The conviction in his voice was overwhelming, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I'd been so afraid of hoping for too much, of wanting something that might not be sustainable or real. But looking at Jake now, seeing the determination and affection in his expression, I finally allowed myself to believe that this might actually work. Come here, I said softly, opening my arms. Jake moved closer immediately, settling against me in the same position we'd held the night before. But this time, there was no urgency or desperation in the embrace. Instead, there was a sense of rightness and belonging that felt both new and familiar. I could get used to this, Jake murmured against my shoulder. Good, I said, running my fingers through his hair. Because I'm planning to hold you as often as you'll let me. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other and talking quietly about everything and nothing. Jake told me more about his family situation and his worries about medical school. I shared some of my own anxieties about graduation and finding a career that would actually fulfill me. As the evening wore on, our conversation became more intimate and personal. Jake asked me about my coming out experience and how I'd known I was gay. I told him about previous relationships and what had worked and what hadn't. He shared his confusion about his own sexuality and his fear that he might be disappointing people who had expectations about his life. I keep thinking about my parents, Jake said at one point, his voice thoughtful. They've always assumed I'd end up with a nice girl, get married, have kids, follow the traditional path. I don't know how they're going to react if I tell them I'm in a relationship with a man. You don't have to tell them anything until you're ready, I said gently. And when you are ready, we'll figure out the best way to approach it together. We'll figure it out together, Jake repeated, as if testing how the words felt. I like the sound of that. I've been trying to handle everything on my own for so long that having a partner in this feels almost too good to be true. It's not too good to be true, I said firmly. It's just good. And you deserve good things, Jake. You deserve to be happy and supported and loved. The word loved slipped out before I could stop it, and I felt Jake tense slightly in my arms. We hadn't talked about love yet, hadn't even really defined what we were to each other beyond more than friends. But the word felt right, even if it might be too soon to say it out loud. Sorry, I said quickly. I didn't mean to. I know we haven't talked about. Don't apologize, Jake said, pulling back to look at me. I'm not scared of that word, Alex. If anything, I'm relieved to hear you say it, because I've been feeling something that might be love for weeks now and didn't know what to do with it. My heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Really, really, Jake said, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. I love the way you make me feel safe and understood. I love how you challenge me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. I love your laugh and your smile, and the way you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating on something. Tears were definitely threatening now, and I had to blink several times to keep them at bay. Jake, I love you, he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I love you, Alex. And I wanted you to know. I love you too, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I've loved you for months, probably since the first week you moved in. I just never thought I'd get to tell you. Jake's smile was radiant, and he leaned forward to kiss me with a tenderness that made my head spin. This kiss was different from the ones we'd shared the night before, less desperate and more certain, a confirmation of feelings rather than an exploration of possibility. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard and grinning at each other like idiots. So, Jake said, his voice slightly breathless, I guess we're doing this. I guess we are, I agreed. How do you feel about that? Terrified and excited and completely sure all at the same time, Jake said honestly. How about you? Exactly the same, I said, laughing at the accuracy of his description. But mostly just grateful. Grateful that you were brave enough to tell me how you felt. Grateful that we found our way to each other. Grateful that I get to love you and be loved by you. Me too, Jake said, settling back into my arms. Me too. As we held each other in the growing darkness of my bedroom, I found myself thinking about how much had changed in just 2 days. 48 hours ago, I'd been resigned to loving Jake from a distance, convinced that my feelings would never be reciprocated. Now, we were lying in each other's arms, having exchanged declarations of love and promises to figure out this new relationship together. It felt like a miracle, but it also felt earned. We'd built a foundation of friendship and trust over months of living together, of supporting each other through stress and celebrating each other's successes. The romantic love that had developed between us wasn't separate from that friendship. It was an extension of it, a deepening of the connection that had already existed. What are you thinking about? Jake asked softly, his voice drowsy with contentment. Just how lucky we are, I said. How many people get to fall in love with someone they already know and trust so completely? Not many, I guess, Jake said. We definitely didn't do this the conventional way, did we? No, I agreed with a laugh. But I think our way might be better. We already know we're compatible as roommates and friends. Everything else is just bonus. The best kind of bonus, Jake murmured, pressing a soft kiss to my collarbone. We talked for a while longer, making plans for the weekend and discussing practical things like how to handle our living situation now that our relationship had changed. Jake was adamant that he wanted to keep sharing the apartment, and I was more than happy to agree. The idea of waking up next to him every morning was almost too wonderful to believe. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake us both, and our conversation grew quieter and more sporadic. Jake's breathing evened out first, and I listened to the steady rhythm of it while running my fingers through his hair. Just before I drifted off to sleep, I felt Jake stir slightly in my arms. Alex, he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. Thank you for catching me when I fell. I smiled in the darkness, my heart full to overflowing with love for this brave, vulnerable, wonderful man who had somehow become mine. Thank you for letting me, I whispered back. And as we settled into sleep together for the second night in a row, I knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of something beautiful.